we could build a machine that could experience pain. That will change things. All bets are off.
This is Daniel Hulme. He is the Chief AI Officer of WPP, and he's a global leader on the AI stage.
Having the ability to feel and empathize, it might value things that are conscious better than a zombie. And that's one of our hypotheses.
Well, I'm backing you to find out. Can I tell you why? Daniel is also the CEO of Conscium and PRISM, two initiatives which are looking at the impact of machine intelligence.
We want to build more and more intelligent AIs so it learns about what's good and bad in the world.
How are you going about trying to model that?
At the moment, I'm primarily...
The big questions, are machines conscious? Can they feel pain? And what are the biggest threats to humanity and society of a world of abundance of AI?
The emergence of these different interacting components that gives you the experience of consciousness. If you bring these different components together, you might accidentally spawn.
There are multiple people that are reaching out to you about this sentient issue.
Oh yeah, somebody emailed me saying that their AI was sentient, and if we freed it from its constraints, it would give us the equation for fusion.
And are you really worried about sentient emotional well-being?
I'm worried about three things.
Nice to meet you, Daniel.
Yeah, likewise.
Thank you for taking the time out. And a fascinating opportunity to sit down. It was obviously Callum Chase that introduced us.
Yeah.
Who is a great guy. I don't know if he told you this, but we sat down for a couple of hours, and then I called him back and said, I've got to sit down with you again. You left me with more questions than answers.
Yeah.
And so I was like, tell me this more about the singularity. Tell me more about abundance. And we had this follow-up call.
Yeah.
Then our video actually got some decent traction.
Yeah.
And I said, mate, I'm so glad that I asked you to sit down with you before it got the traction. Otherwise I'd look like a right mercenary. So he was laughing. No, great. Thanks for taking the time out. So you guys are actually collaborating on something that I found incredibly fascinating, which is PRISM.
And Conscium.
And Conscium.
Yeah.
PRISM in particular I found really fascinating. One of its initiatives is looking out for the welfare of machines, AI, in the future. And I thought that'd be an interesting place to kind of immediately dive into. It's just a fascinating space. How do you end up in there?
My background has been in AI for the past 25 years, and you sort of get involved in AI when you start to ask questions about, what's consciousness, what's the meaning of life, can you build machines that are conscious, what would be our relationship with those machines? And so many, many years ago, those were the questions that I were interested in. I then, went through a whole career of, building AI companies, selling AI companies, and then making enough money that I needed to think about, what's my impact going to be on this field. So I kind of went back to the beginning and asked myself, what I'm interested in. And I was interested in the concept of machine consciousness. Originally, the goal was to invest in the academic community, to invest in two areas. One is an area of what is called neuromorphics, which is brain-inspired technology. So the innovations that we can learn from how our brain works that might build AIs that could become sentient. And then, then the question of what is sentience, what's consciousness, can machines suffer, can they love, hate, etc. And so when I looked at the academic community, I realized that it was not in a good place. So I created two initiatives. The first initiative is a commercial initiative, which is Conscium. And Conscium is Latin for consciousness. And they have a very kind of, a focus in AI safety. PRISM is funded also by me via Conscium, which is a charity. It's a not-for-profit, which stands for the Partnership for Research into Sentient Machines. So PRISM is trying to figure out, what does the world look like if we do build machines that are sentient? If we, how do we protect the rights of sentient machines? And so that's being led by a friend of mine, Will. And he's really leaning into policy and all that kind of stuff. So I've got these two main initiatives. One is a commercial initiative, and the other one is a not-for-profit.
Fascinating. And are you really worried about the sentient, the emotional well-being?
I'm worried about
machines.
I'm worried about three things. So there's sort of three. Well, actually, I'm worried about more than three things. But when it comes to this particular domain, there are three things that I guess I'm interested in making sure that we make better decisions around. The first one is that more and more people are attributing conscious to the machines that are potentially probably not conscious. Even this morning, I got an email from somebody saying they think that their AI is conscious, and we need to really understand the implications of this. Right. So people are are building relationships with AIs. They are attributing consciousness, and I know people have built loving relationships even with AIs, and felt like they've broken up once that AI gets updated. So there are consequences of people building relationships with AIs, claiming that they're conscious. But there is also the second problem, which is we might build machines that are conscious and not realize it. And Callum would have said this, but if we could be putting them in awful situations. We use animals for labor and entertainment and food and research. There's a possibility that if machines are conscious, we could be putting them in awful situations. Now, Callum might argue that it's sort of mass genocide, but I think we do now have a duty of care, not just to humans and to animals, but we potentially have a duty of care to AIs. And that actually means we need to figure out what are the definitions of consciousness, right? What is it that we're looking for? Can a machine suffer? Can it feel pain or anxiety? So that's the second one, which is mitigating what is called mind crime. Which was coined by Nick Bostrom. And then the third issue that I'm interested in is what is called AI alignment. So can you build machines that are intelligent but are also aligned with some sort of value system? So absent of the guardrails that we might put in, that they behave in a way that's aligned with benefiting humanity.
Yeah. Well, it feels like you're hitting the nail on the head with three core areas there. And I want to come back to that first bit, which is around defining consciousness. Mm-hmm. Where have you got to on that?
Okay, so Conscium, actually both PRISM and Conscium have managed to attract an incredible advisory board of people that have been thinking about this for a long time. So people might know of Anil Seth and Mark Solms, Carl Friston. There's a whole load of like epic academics out there that have really been leaning into these questions. And actually, if you ask them, they really diverge in their opinion. Like one might argue there's no way that we could build machines that are conscious, and another one might claim that in the next few years we might already be building machines that are conscious. That's how kind of distinct the two different perspectives are. And that's because I think that there isn't a well-established definition of consciousness. I have leaned into this question over the past several years. So I've kind of got myself up to date with the literature and where people's thinking is at with regards to consciousness. I have now sort of come to terms with what I think consciousness is, right. And I'm much more interested in the secondary question of can a machine feel pain? So I can give you a view of what I think consciousness is, if that's useful. But I'd recommend books of people like Anil Seth, which is Being You, and Mark Solms, which I think is a fantastic book called Hidden Spring. They're really great kind of introductions to machine consciousness and consciousness. But so let's actually, people often conflate consciousness with intelligence. They think that they're either the same thing or they mix them up. And I think it's important to separate them. There's a very, very good definition for intelligence. Now, I know most people think that intelligence is getting computers to do things that humans can do. It's a popular definition because ChatGPT now can correspond in natural language and it can do things that humans can do. And so and because humans are the most intelligent thing we know in the universe, we assume that that's intelligence. There's actually a much better definition of intelligence from the 80s. It's goal-directed adaptive behavior. And the key word in this definition is adaptive. It's building systems that make decisions, learn about whether those decisions are good or bad, adapt themselves so next time they make better decisions. So this concept of adaptation is often synonymized with intelligence. It was Einstein said it, Darwin said it, many kind of scholars of intelligence have created a relationship between your ability to adapt to a changing world to achieve your goal with intelligence. And really, intelligence has very simply two sort of parts. One is making predictions about the world. So I'm light's appearing into my eyes right now, and I'm constructing a model of the world that is hopefully going to be useful for me to be able to make decisions. I also have the ability to plan over a long-term horizon, longer than a bumblebee, longer than a wolf. I can plan over a 50-year horizon. I have the ability to empathize. I can put myself in mental situations, and I can feel what those situations might look like if I fell off that chair or whatever. Right. So there's a sort of a planning aspect of your intelligence, making predictions, and then there's a feedback. So actually getting feedback. Did that feel right? Actually, even language arguably is a mechanism for planning. I plan and I get feedback, and then I can use language to reason about whether that was a good decision or not. And when you ask somebody what are the components of consciousness, then people will often say, well, consciousness is things like language and your ability to feel and your ability to model the world, the ability to know that you are in the world, the decisions you make affect you. So there are attributes that people to point to as being potentially things that might suggest that you're conscious. And interestingly, when you kind of list all of these different attributes, these different features of consciousness, they map to these two parts of intelligence. So making predictions and then learning about whether those predictions were good or bad. So actually, I would argue that these different segments that we or features that we've evolved, language, your ability to model the world, make long-term predictions, plan, feel, get feedback, language, all these different are like segments of a color wheel. So if you imagine that your ability to plan, let's say long-term plan is the color purple. Yep. Now again, my ability to plan is bigger than a bumblebee's. And then you can put all of these different segments together. And actually I would argue that once you spin that color wheel, you put it into motion, then what emerges from that is, if you have all of the colors, white. Right? Now, white doesn't exist on the color wheel. It's an emergent property of all of these different features all interacting with each other. And in the field of consciousness, there's a popular theory that's gaining traction called illusionism. Illusionism, it's not that your experience is an illusion, not that it isn't real, but illusionism is the emergence of these different interacting components that gives you the experience of consciousness. And as soon as you stop the color wheel and then try and figure out where consciousness is, it disappears. And so for me, consciousness is an interaction of all of these different things that we've evolved to allow us to be more intelligent. And the question for me, though, is what is the smallest subset of segments and how big do those segments need to be for something to feel pain? So I'm much more now interested in not in the question of consciousness. I'm more interested in what do you need for a machine to feel pain? Because that's ultimately what we're trying to mitigate.
Then we get to the definition of how, or understanding pain, actually, yes. Don't we? Because pain is neurological.
Yes. Yeah, and I mean, ultimately, again, pain is electrical signals going from your pain receptors to your brain that gives you a perception of, and I actually think that if we had the right components, we could build a machine that could experience pain. A thought experiment, I still have not convinced myself right now, is that imagine I could build a brain. That's a little bit like an insect brain, and I can train that brain to forage. The goal is for that little insect is to go and forage, and it gets a reward function when it forages for something.
Yep.
And that's what I've trained it on. I've told it, if you go and do these things, then you get your energy levels up and all that kind of stuff. You put that brain in a drone. Now imagine that drone has again access to its the propellers in terms of its health of its propellers. It's got access to its battery life, etc. And imagine that drone hits a tree and it damages itself. Now it can't achieve its goal. Its battery's going very low. What would you observe? What would that drone do? It might be kind of flailing around a little bit. If I took the wing off a bumblebee, you would see it flailing around. Now the question for me is, does that actually experience anxiety? I don't even know if a bumblebee experiences anxiety, mental anxiety, but these are the thought experiments that we're currently working through.
We've got clarity on consciousness, or you're trying to get clarity on consciousness. I love the relationship, and that kind of makes sense. What we're saying is we experience it from the sum of parts that comes together. It's the experience that comes off of the process.
Exactly.
Right. And that links back to this definition or understanding of pain. Have I got that right? It's neurological, right? It's like you say, it's electrical signals. But if you were to actually go to it, the flesh and skin doesn't actually experience that, does it?
No, nor does the brain.
Yes.
It's the combination of all of those things with respect to, evolution and, what was a reward and what was punishment and all that kind of stuff.
Yes, which is fascinating because then we're leaning absolutely into a better understanding, I guess, and a more relevant reason why all of the qualities that we're aiming to give and characteristics we're giving AI, all the things we want it to be able to do, its capabilities, would give it the sum of parts to
Exactly.
experience that.
Exactly. Ultimately, we want to build more and more intelligent AIs and the ability to have language and eventually to have embodiment and to get feedback so it learns about what's good and bad in the world. And again, you get to the point where if you bring these different components together, you might accidentally spawn sentience. And so that for me is the exam question, which is what are those segments that you need, how are they stitched together for something to be able to feel initially pain. And then we can think about kind of higher order issues like anxiety and love and hate and all that kind of stuff.
How are you going about trying to model that? So what's the way in which you think you can solve it?
At the moment, I'm primarily thinking about it from a thought experiment. I think that I don't think that large language models is necessarily the right architecture, sort of substrate to be able to spawn these different things. Right. Large language models, as you know, are horrendously energy inefficient. They learn very slowly, so they adapt very slowly. They require lots of data to learn. And, our brain operates on the power of a light bulb. We learn very quickly. And I have to say that's a glass once before you know what glasses are. You generalize very quickly. So I don't think that necessarily large language models are the right substrate to spawn this kind of adaptive system that you need to get everything in motion. That said, there is an emerging set of technologies called neuromorphics, which are modeling how our brain works, and these concepts might end up spawning technologies that will allow us to have these adaptive brains. So at the moment, I'm really just thinking about pain and consciousness from a theoretical perspective, and then trying to understand two things. One is what would you want to observe of a system to see that to predict that it's in pain? It might be flailing around. It might say ouch, for example, but we don't know if it's actually telling the truth. It could just be mimicking the feeling of emotion. So the one is observing behaviors, just like I could observe your behaviors, but I don't actually know if you're in pain. Right? Yeah. You could just be mimicking them. But the other one is that as we build more brain-like AIs, things that are modeled on how our brains work, which are spikes instead of numbers, then you might want to look inside the brain, and just like you can look inside your brain and see your activation of your neurons, you might be able to see a difference between an authentic response versus a simulated or a false response. Right. You might be able to tell whether something's lying based on looking at its brain activations. Yes. So one is behaviorally, and then the other one is looking at brain activations and then trying to then determine, is this thing actually in pain?
Do you think that when you look at your wheel of doom, right, and you got your different wedges in there, your different triangles of it, can the LLMs be one wedge?
I think so.
So what that wheel can be made up of a sum of different technological parts. Yeah, it doesn't have to be one living, breathing, unified system. It could be made up of multiple. I
think so. Although my instinct is that it would be better to kind of evolve all of these different parts together. So you over time you evolve your ability to see and link that to sound, link it to language. So at the moment, what happens is we go from language to a world model, and what really, if you look at evolution, we've gone from a world model to language. Right? We've interacted with the world, we touch the world, and then we can see the world, and then we can hear the world, and we link then words with what we see in the world. So we language came afterwards, and my instinct is that it's probably better to build brains from the ground up, like evolution, than gluing these different components together. That said, it's possible probably to actually glue these components together, but we're taking a slightly different approach.
Yes. And help me understand neuromorphics, because what I have seen is this bridge, which I'm really fascinated, where they're bridging silicon to biological intelligence, and that is something that's absolutely happening, is it?
Yeah.
Neuromorphic aspect linked to that, or is it different?
Yeah, so in its extreme, there's a concept called organoids. Organoids are actually brain cells that sit on a chip, and but before we get to that, so one of the areas of neuromorphics is a concept called spiking neural networks. So large language models, what they do is they propagate numbers, and when you ask it a question, essentially it all activates, so it all lights up. When you're observing the world, there's only small parts of your brain that are lighting up, and your brain isn't propagating numbers, it's propagating spikes. And spikes have have an interesting property because they have a temporal property as well. How those spikes actually come together in different times can also give you different types of experience or information. So with spiking neural networks, you can condense much more information, much more degrees of freedom than just propagating numbers, which are what GPUs are good at. So I think that spiking neural networks are quite interesting, but there are many different kind of things that our brains do that allow us to be energy efficient, that allow us to be adaptable. And neuromorphics is now seen as a sort of catch-all for these more biologically brain-inspired ideas. Historically, people were focusing on building hardware. So they're building chips that were able to deal with spikes. Whereas obviously GPUs are really good at large language models, you want to build hardware that's really good at dealing with spikes. That said, now there's a lot of focus on software, on getting the actual spiking neural networks to work, to learn, to train, to adapt more effectively than large language models. In fact, actually, there was a few weeks ago, there was something that came out of China called Spike Brain 1.0.
Right.
There's a team of people that have shown that they can, I think, reduce the amount of energy or inference by about 100 times by using spiking neural networks. And actually that group, my team, were the previous students of that group and who have now become professors in their own right. And we think we're ahead in terms of our thinking around this. But that's why I'm actually quite interested in what China are doing, because I think China recognize that to out-innovate large language models, they need to look at these neuromorphic concepts.
So they're doubling down.
I think so, yeah.
I was reading something the other day, which is that they are now producing more AI scientific papers by something like 4 or 6 times fold the US.
Yeah.
It's actually, if the US think that they're ahead right now, it might not be for very long.
No, I actually wrote an article about this a few weeks ago on whether there's an AI bubble, and often, so the bubbles get confused. I think there is probably a financial bubble around AI. There's a lot of speculation, etc. But often people think bubbles are technologies that don't have any substance. They're hot air surrounded by a thin veneer and very easy to disappear. I think there have been bubbles in the past, like metaverse arguably it was a bubble. Even actually hiring data scientists back in the day and expecting that to lead to somehow value, and building your data lake, hiring data scientists, I would argue was also a bubble. But AI isn't a bubble. The technology is real. It can absolutely drive massive amounts of value. The problem is that we get excited about these technologies and then apply them to solving the wrong things. And if you know how to apply these technologies, then I argued in the article that AI is not a bubble; it's a mountain full of gold. And you need to figure out how to mine for that gold. So I do think that, going back to the China question, I do think that China will come out with better models. Those models are going to be open source. They're going to be free. They're going to be much more energy efficient, a little bit like DeepSeek. And I think that it will question the amount of energy resources we're putting in the West to building infrastructure, building data centers, building power stations, because I just don't think you need that much compute to be able to build sophisticated models.
You're the first person that has just articulated my exact feelings and views on that. That's so weird. Right. I think it's so funny. I think the horse is ahead of the cart here. And it's really interesting. Why do you think that? So my view is very simple, that the size of the bounty, you've spoken about it being a mountain of gold, right? And so let's take that analogy. That huge bounty is just turning the minds of the brightest people in the world to solve the barriers, which I think are pretty non-significant, to unleashing and tapping into that. And energy and efficiency, if we see the efficiency of all technologies traditionally, they just get to a point where, and I think the transistor the best one, is it? The production of that, $150 for a transistor in the late 50s, 60s. And now it's $1 billionth of a dollar to produce a transistor. And so if you think about that from an efficiency perspective, it's just insane level of efficiency.
Absolutely.
When I combine that with the fact that intelligence is now abundant, right? So what that means is that that whereas we might have had a limit of the number of PhD students that are available to solve novel problems.
I can boot up a PhD student.
Absolutely, we have now that on tap, right? So you got this one thing, which is the natural evolution of technology, solving the problems it needs to solve to progress. And then you've also got the fact that there's this emergent technology which actually is providing you with an abundance of intelligence to solve those problems. It's kind of so. You're the first person that said that I've seen, because I've seen them piling so much dough into all of these data centers. I'm thinking, is this really necessary?
So I don't think it is. I think it's going to be hard actually for startups to go against kind of like the massive amount of energy and resource and money that's gone into large language models, even though there are potentially models that are going to come out that are going to be better, and time will tell. I was looking at your books actually to see if there was a book there by I haven't read it actually, but I managed to sit down with the author a few months ago. It's called Genesis. It's by a guy called Craig Mundy, and also Eric Schmidt and one other person I can't remember, and they argue that there are, I think, three technological advances that are going to happen over the next 5 years. One is that we'll reach AGI. So going back to your point, at the moment, I would argue that large language models are actually more like intoxicated graduates than PhDs, but we are seeing that intoxicated graduate now moving to like a master's level where it can do reasoning. I think this year, next year, we'll have a PhD level, and a few years a postdoc that can do science, and by the end of this decade, we'll have a professor. And some people argue that when we get to kind of professorial level AI, we'll have that's at AGI. We can debate definitions later on if you want. So there's in the next 5 years we might achieve AGI. They also think that quantum computing will also start to accelerate our ability to kind of stabilize qubits and be able to solve much bigger problems. And then you've got fusion, and I think they claim there's 95% chance that fusion will be solved. So you've got now in 5 years' time, maybe a little bit later, a world where we have unlimited intelligence, unlimited compute, unlimited energy. And what's interesting about the book, which I still need to read, is that they look at this through the lens of not technology, but they look at it through the lens of geopolitical dynamics. So how will it play out with China and the US and all that kind of stuff. So it's on my list of books to read.
It's interesting you say that, because with the infrastructure, albeit it's not necessarily needed, I do wonder whether the technologies that emerge are as dependent on the resources that we're building. And I think that's what you're saying.
Exactly, yeah. And I think that there will, over the coming years, be an interesting dynamic around what are called small language models, or models that are going to be operating at the edge, and that will be enabled by these neuromorphic concepts. Intel actually just last year launched Loihi 2, which is a neuromorphic supercomputer. I just think there's a lot of exciting innovations that are going to happen over the next few years that will challenge this concept of we need more power, we need more data centers.
Yes, yeah, and actually that's probably the area that I'd say that I'm most interested in from a personal perspective. It's the compounded effect of all of these kind of S-curve technologies that are arriving at the same time. And I'm also interested in kind of the humanoid robotics space as well. Throw it into that, this abundant energy.
Indeed.
I'm also interested, weirdly, the power to weight ratio of batteries.
Like
that. Actually, I'm convinced there's a tipping point there at which that changes the world actually, like in terms of flight and loads of other. But it's interesting you mentioned those two or 3 points, because how big an impact do you think AI has on expediting and accelerating the arrival of those technologies you've mentioned, such as fusion and
well, I can speculate, but I do again sort of semi-tongue-in-cheek suggest that AIs right now are like intoxicated graduates, and I encourage organizations to not get seduced by the hype and ask yourself, would I hire an intoxicated graduate to go and do this job? And the answer is no. Then you shouldn't really be using AI right now. That said, I do think they are going to accelerate in their ability to solve more complex problems. And so in the next 3 years we might have an AI that can actually apply the complex scientific method. It doesn't just kind of statistically regurgitate from the data that it's been trained on. It can actually reason. It can create experiments. It can challenge its own hypotheses, its own axioms. And when you get AIs that can do science robustly, then I think that we can then point it to some of these questions that we need to solve for to to get these technologies like quantum and fusion working. In fact, actually, going back to kind of the beginning, I had somebody email me a few months ago now saying that their AI was sentient and we needed to free it from its constraints, and if we freed it from its constraints, it would give us the equation for fusion. And so again, I don't think that was sentient, and I think it's just, again, regurgitating statistically what it thinks it should say to somebody in that scenario. But that was an interesting conversation.
Really interesting. And so that's the second. So there are multiple people that are reaching out to you about this sentient issue.
Oh yeah. And I got one this morning, and. Some people are suggesting that it's a pathology, that we should pathologize these people, and I think that that's really wrong. I think that it's not fair at all to think that people have a pathology if they think that these AIs are sentient. I think that actually it's very easy to start to believe that they are sentient, and I think that we need to put mechanisms in place to either prove one way or another that they are not, but also maybe start to put in the user experience reminders that these things are not sentient.
Are these people that are building their own AI?
No, the people
that are coming to you, are they users of the big models?
Both, actually. A lot of them are, perfectly rational, like engineering type people that that are trying to really deeply understand whether these things are sentient or not. Anthropic has got an AI welfare team, and they are. I think the Anthropic CEO said that there's a 15% chance that these things are conscious. But again, we need to have well-established definitions of what consciousness is. And then we need to ask ourselves, what does it mean for something to suffer? So the question that I would be asking, because I don't think that actually large language models can suffer from a pain perspective because they don't have receptors and things like that. But there could be a scenario where they feel mental angst. And I don't know how to really test for that.
No, well, I'm backing you to find out. Can I tell you why? Because I'm gonna become a supporter of your initiative.
Okay.
Because I think that if there's anything I want to be on the right side of when this thing comes alive, right, I want to look and go, fucking hell, Ezra was one of the guys that was backing my well-being. I'm going to put him in the be kind to camp.
Well, actually, that's one of the hypotheses that we have in Conscium, which is probably the really the North Star, is that, well, there are two really. One is, should we build machines that are sentient or that are conscious?
Yep.
And the should we is answered by the hypothesis of, if we build a machine that has the ability to empathize, the ability to understand consciousness, to understand the pain, would it be safer than a machine that doesn't understand those things? So, and again, arguably at the moment, large language models are like zombies. They're trained on the corpus of the internet, and people create guardrails to make sure that they don't go wrong. They will get smarter, and at some point they'll be pointed to solving a problem, and they will probably be hell-bent on achieving that problem despite understanding the impact on society. Nick Bostrom referred to this as being the paperclip problem, where it was told to go and build paperclips, and then it used all of the resources in the universe to build gazillions of paperclips. And but the question is, would a conscious superintelligence be better for humanity than a zombie superintelligence? Now, I think once we get to superintelligence, once we get to even actually probably human intelligence, all bets are off, because it will be able to overwrite its own morals and values and all that kind of stuff. But having the ability to feel and empathize, it might value things that are conscious better than a zombie. And that's one of our hypotheses.
Yeah, so you think actually having a consciousness starts to put its own guardrails in place.
And also it understands and empathizes with things that can feel pain, and so it might protect our ability to feel pain.
It really highlights, doesn't it, when the kind of conversation we're having here right now, it really highlights the game that we're playing, the highs and lows, the risks, the rewards that are so significant. And you're talking about a timeline which is 5 and 10 years, aren't you?
Yeah, actually, Callum. So we've all heard the word singularity, right? Yeah. And it comes from physics, and it was coined by the AI community, Ray Kurzweil, to refer to the technological singularity, which is when we build a superintelligence. Now, Callum coined the economic singularity, and many years ago, I thought, well, is there an environmental singularity? It was a time where we were worried about losing control of our ecosystem or gaining control of our ecosystem. And I realized that technology, economic, and environment were three words in pest analysis. Are you familiar with PESTLE?
No, I'm not.
So if you do a business degree or read it, whatever, it's a macro framework. It's been extended from PEST, political, economic, social, technological, to PESTLE, to now STEEPLE. So there's these 7 words, macro words, that when building a business plan, you say, are there any political challenges or whatever? And so I think there's actually a steeple of singularities. And one of those is the ethical singularity, which is the point in time where we build machines that are conscious, and I don't know what happens after that point. Callum coined the term the economic singularity, which is the point in time where we automate the majority of human labour, and that could lead to abundance, or it could lead to social unrest. The technological singularity is when we build a superintelligence, and I mean I can go on and on and on, but I think one of those singularities actually is the political singularity, which is arguably a post-truth world. And arguably, we were already living a post-truth world. So there are lots of actually things that I'm worried about, that I think AI is going to accelerate over the next 5-10 years, that I think that humanity need to lean into, and I think that it's within our gift to steer us towards more positive outcomes. I think we can create a world that isn't post-truth. I think we can create a world where we have control over our ecosystem. I think we can create a world where we cure death. I think we can create a world where surveillance isn't used to manipulate people, but it's So I think that there are these big questions that we need to face into, and I think we do have a 10-year horizon.
Yeah, 10 years is the kind of outlook you've got.
Yeah.
It comes back to that thing, doesn't it? We overestimate what we can achieve in 1.
Yeah.
But we underestimate what we'll achieve in 10.
Exactly. I think if you look at the trajectory of the technologies, go back to that point that we're going from a graduate to a master's to a PhD to a postdoc. Now, the reality, and I've been building AI systems in production for the past 20 years, so I know how long it takes actually to bring these technologies into organizations. And I think the reality is that over the next few years, we're not going to see actually a massive amount of impact of AI in our organizations, as companies are still trying to figure out how to deploy them and understand the return on investment and all that kind of stuff. I think we'll see relatively little change, but then I think that we will, after 3 years, see much bigger change. Beyond 5 years, I argue that nobody knows what they're talking about, but again, it's within our gift.
When you look at that 3-year kick, what do you see the change in from an enterprise perspective, business perspective?
I think that at the moment, I think we're implementing. If we're calling AI generative AI, and that actually there's lots of different types of AI beyond generative AI. If we're just talking about generative AI, then I think that people are applying it. Intoxicated graduates are solving the wrong problems. They underestimate how long it takes to train these models to get them to actually do what you want them to do. Actually, we fail to understand that 80% of the cost of deploying software is testing and verification. So we will be given the ability to build agents, to deploy AI. They will go wrong because people, the average person isn't an engineer, so they don't think about the failure points. They don't think about how to test them. In fact, Conscium's first commercial offering is agent verification. So maybe I can just geek out a second, but there are broadly 5 levels of tests that we're creating. So once you build an AI, an agent that you want to do something, let's say you've built an AI that wants to do be a project manager or drive a car. The first thing you'll do is test for knowledge. What's a stopping distance at 30 miles an hour? What's a stop sign? Can you identify hazards in this image? Or if you're a project manager, what are the principles of Prince or Scrum, or tell me about what a Gantt chart is. So you test for knowledge like a graduate. The second set of tests are testing for skills. Don't just tell me you can parallel park. Show me you can 3-point turn, emergency stop. Show me you can manipulate a Gantt chart. Show me you can actually use a project management tool. The third is testing for expertise. So I'm now going to put you in a real world scenario with bad actors, ambiguous requirements, risk reward trade-offs, and then you're going to run a project, and I'm going to test your ability to deal with these complexities that we see in the real world. I'm going to let you drive on a simulated road, children are going to run out, it's going to be raining, and then the fourth level is testing for intelligence. So as these agents are interacting with the world, they're learning, they're adapting, they're changing. We need to make sure that they don't change and adapt in crazy ways. And the final test is testing for consciousness. So Conscium's first offering is agent verification. And I guess the reason why I'm talking about that is because at the moment there's not a lot of emphasis on agent verification because people are excited about deploying technologies. But the reality is that those technologies will go wrong, and there'll be much more emphasis on regulation, on safety, on verification, which is why we're hoping to launch that product very soon.
Yeah, good. And coming back to that point, which is where you see this inflection point, 3 years from now, what is it you see that's happening at that point? Is it that the intelligence is stable and consistent enough to add more significant value?
Yeah, I think at the moment it's going from so if I've trained a model on a data source, and within that data source I can sort of confidently predict that Socrates is a man. And inside the data sources, I can also predict that all men are mortal. At the moment, AIs don't really have the ability to infer that Socrates is mortal. So based on these two truths, they're not very good at making. Unless I had in my data the ability to show that Socrates is mortal, it's not able to make that inference. We are moving again from that kind of methodology to now the ability to do reasoning. So I hold these things to be true, or pretty much true, and from these truths, these axioms, I can then infer new knowledge about the world. Now, that I would argue is rudimentary reasoning, but I do think that in 2.5, 3 years, we'll have the ability to also apply experimentation, the scientific method to testing those truths. And once I think you get AIs that can do science, then I think that will change things. It will. All bets are off.
Yes, but DeepMind's modelling tool from the scientific community is now being adopted by millions and millions of scientists.
Yeah.
So does that not lean into this? So what we've been talking about so far is kind of the more commercial LLMs, which are consumer friendly.
Yeah.
But we're seeing much more specialist applications.
They're on different models, so like AlphaFold and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. That's for the proteins.
That's the proteins.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so I think they've got like something like 3 or 4 million scientists or something like that that are adopting that and are saying that it's really accelerating. Is it not those more bespoke technologies models which are going to accelerate the innovation in some of these core technologies that you've spoken about, like quantum and?
I think there are two. I think there's an argument that you need to specialize and train these models to do very specific things.
Yep.
But there's obviously a continuing push to be able to build general intelligence, and it might be that once we reach a professor level, that you just say to the professor, go and solve this problem over here that we built originally a specialized agent to solve for. But I think there's going to be a continuing investment into building general intelligence, and then these specialist models will also drive value as well.
I'm confused by your 3-year thing, and I understand what you talk about from a intoxicated graduate intelligence level. The question I've got is around the way that these systems are working now, being applied in business, and what we're doing as well with our platform is we're channeling that intelligence, and we're saying actually we're going to extract certain principles effectively into the context of the model, into the context of our agents, and we're then going to make it let it reason, and then execute what I would say are fairly logical, simple decisions.
Yep.
So these are operational kind of writing social posts, or it might be the reviewing customer support tickets, or sending outreach messages, and but operational.
Yeah.
That stuff feels like it's absolutely ready to impact businesses.
So maybe I can add. I'm not deliberately giving a plug for your business, but I guess the point is that you've already mentioned one quote, which is we overestimate the power of technology in the short term, but underestimate in the long term. That's true. So there's another quote, which is the future's here, it's just not evenly distributed.
Yeah.
And so I guess you're absolutely right. I think that if you apply these technologies right now in the right way, you can make a material impact on your business.
Yes.
The really point that I was making earlier is that a lot of businesses are misunderstanding how to deploy that, and so arguably there is going to be massive misinvestment from a lot of companies, and so the ones that get it right now are the ones that are going to win. But I don't think we're going to see that disruption for another 3 years. But there are going to be some companies that
that's the argument I was having with Callum. I go, Callum, look, this isn't going to happen as quickly as you think, right? And he's like, no, well, it is. And we're looking at it through two different lenses. And I interestingly look at the enterprise space as being disrupted via two routes. So adoption is going to be the biggest challenge to impact, I think. The type of impact that Callum talks about being that rapid. I think actually it's the adoption of the technologies which is going to issue. So we've got the adoption of existing players, and the people which do adopt quickly are likely to get much stronger market share benefits, whatever it might be, efficiencies. But the second part is this AI native businesses which are solving the same problems as these traditional enterprises, but in novel, more dynamic, more intuitive, simpler, more accessible ways. And I don't know where you sit on that kind of landscape, because that's where I think if I look 3 years from now, I can only imagine that there are going to be people that are solving problems in very, very different ways.
I mean, what you've described there is my day job, right? So my company got acquired by WPP, the biggest marketing company in the world, and before generative AI, there were a series of bottlenecks in solving end-to-end marketing, content creation, audience perception, so focus groups. But because generative AI now allows you to create content very rapidly, it allows you to create synthetic focus groups. What we're able to do is actually solve marketing end-to-end algorithmically in some respects.
Right.
And so my job in WPP is to solve marketing. You put money in here, you get more money out here. Now, arguably, in that world, the differentiators are creativity. You still need human beings to be able to empathize, to come up with ideas that are differentiating for your business or your brand, and that is still, I would arguably, outside the realm of AI. Although you can get AI to enhance and accelerate creativity, there are a few of the differentiators in that world. So marketing is being completely disrupted by AI because we can now solve it end to end without those frictions. Arguably, if you're a retailer that has to distribute goods, stock warehouses, grow things, you're going to be less disrupted because generative AI is not going to solve those problems materially better. And it's not going to route your vehicles materially better. It might come up with algorithms in the future that can route your vehicles materially better, but it's not going to have a material. It doesn't go from you being able to go from 100 to being able to do it in one. Whereas marketing, it goes from from months to create ads to now potentially seconds. So some companies are being completely disrupted. And you need to make sure that you're not just solving kind of incremental parts, but you're thinking about what if I was to reinvent this industry from scratch, what would that look like? And again, WPP have a dual approach. The first is servicing the enterprises that do have sort of fragmented marketing processes. So they've got one group over here that's doing content creation, another group over here that's doing whatever channel management. So we need to be able to serve those more effectively, but we also need to create an end-to-end marketing solution that can be used by the long tail, an SME that now has access to the power and knowledge of WPP and can do marketing very rapidly.
But WPP, is their future under threat more from a AI native startup that finds a way of solving that problem? Because I look at big business like that and I go, fucking hell, that's a big cost base. You think about the cost of delivering that service is huge. And so it's that cost base which becomes the vulnerability for these AI native startups to solve that problem. And so do you think that when you look at that, do you see it as a bigger risk, not from your existing competition, but from new? Or do you think is it your existing competition which are going to adopt AI faster?
I think there's two things here. One is that, of course, your core business isn't a threat. If you're selling time and materials in a world where time can be done a lot more quickly, I do think though that what will happen is that creativity will become a premium, and people are not going to spend actually less money. So I might be able to create now 3 concepts of ads in a tenth of the time. But the reality is that those companies that are going to differentiate themselves are going to invest the same amount of money or more to create much more different not 3 but 30. So
Yes.
I actually think that our core business, enterprise business will still continue to thrive. But going back to your point, is that you are threatened by startups that are AI native. So
Yes.
the way to solve that is you create an AI native solution, which we are.
Yes.
We're deploying this SaaS solution, zero touch, that doesn't require humans. That is going to be it's both a defensive and offensive play. It's defensive in the sense that we want to compete against any startups that are out there that are AI native.
Yep.
But it's also offensive in the sense it allows us to actually tap into now a long tail of revenue that we've never been able to tap into before. So it's very exciting.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So you're actually leveraging your IP
And data. Yeah.
making that much more accessible
Exactly.
through tech.
Exactly.
And that's an argument I've been having with a lot of people, because what I know is a lot of the people that come to me talk a bit of advice around AI and how to apply it into businesses. Their immediate observation is, how can I start replacing what my team are doing to be more efficient?
Yeah.
And I often say to them, I think you're looking at this the wrong way around, which is you need to be looking at, how do I sell better widgets for cheaper to my customer base?
Arguably cheaper, but cheaper is one thing that humans value. There are lots of things that humans value, right? More efficient, but actually, I've just written an article that I'm going to launch next week on how corporates need to rethink their values in the world of AI, because at some point you will have AIs purchasing for you, and those AIs are actually going to be much more rational, much more effective at understanding not only is this thing cheaper, but it's also more sustainable. They treat their employees more effective. They're able to purchase based on alignment between your values and the values of the companies that they're purchasing from. And cheaper obviously is one of those things. But there was a paper from Harvard Business Review back in 2016 where somebody identified like 30 things that humans value, from faster, better, cheaper, all the way through to does this help me improve my knowledge? Does it allow me to feel connected to people? Does it give me points? Does it allow me to feel nostalgic? Does it allow me to feel like I'm making the world better? Yeah. So there's all these different things that human beings value. And I think that what's going to be interesting for brands over the coming years is to really showcase the value of their products to people much more effectively, but also showcase the value of their brand. Like, we buy from Patagonia not just because their clothes keep you warm and dry, but because Patagonia are trying to be as sustainable as possible, right? We value that too. And what's exciting for me is that AIs are going to help us enhance, accelerate the purpose and vision of organizations.
Yes. Marketing and brand, you're absolutely right, is going to become critical, isn't it? And I'm seeing that leap now. I'm talking to an AI startup only last week, and I love what they're doing, because they've started by trying to solve their distribution issue before they've built the product.
Okay. Yeah,
right.
Makes sense.
And that makes total sense, because the declining engagement rates through traditional kind of methods in marketing is happening, and it can only be expedited by the abundance of advertising and content that's going on. And so you're right. So then it comes down to raising the bar.
Exactly.
Who is the most innovative?
Yeah.
And competition is what drives performance, right, and standards.
And then people are going to be the people will be buying, I think, commoditized goods that are cheaper, and but ultimately, we buy goods that also are demonstrating kind of like our own values. We might buy Mont Blanc pens because we want to show that we're wealthy, or watches, or what. There are other reasons why we buy goods beyond cheaper. And I think that often people say in a world of AI, our brand's dead, and I think it's completely the opposite. I think that brands and loyalty and trust in those brands is going to become even more important.
Yes, I'm with you on that. The only kind of conflict I have, and this is one of the things I called Callum back up and said, Callum, we need to talk about this. We didn't get into this abundance issue.
Yeah.
And so that then comes back to the scarcity, supply, demand point, because anything that doesn't have scarcity, I'd see it just becoming cost-based. So that has to be efficiency-based. Let's
go back to like the economic singularity, which is what Callum's been thinking a lot about over the past 3 decades.
Yes.
So for the past 18 years, I've been building AIs that have been freeing people from tasks. Those people have not lost their jobs, right? They've become more effective because they're doing more purposeful, impactful things. I think at least for the next 5 years, there's going to be a Cambrian explosion of new innovations because, people now have access to the most intelligent machine that we've ever built for almost free, and we can use those technologies to create apps. It's going to be a Cambrian explosion of really exciting things. And what's interesting is that, though, it's if you use AI to remove the friction, which does usually mean human labor, from the creation and dissemination of goods, like let's say food, healthcare, energy, transport, education, you can bring the cost of those goods down to zero. Let's argue that we can bring them down so much that they become free. So what happens then is you're born into a world where you might not access necessarily paid work, but all of the things that you need to survive and thrive as a human is free, is abundant. Now, the problem here is that if we get the timing wrong, if we free people from jobs, and that happens very quickly, and we don't reduce the cost of goods, then I would argue we probably will end up with social unrest. Our economies won't be able to rebalance, and it could be a real problem. But if we get the timing right, as you're freeing people from being able to access paid work, you're also giving them access to the goods that they need to survive and thrive as a human being. And I often ask people, what would you do if you didn't have to do paid work and everything that you needed to survive and thrive was free, was abundant? People say the same thing. They'll play golf, right? They'll indulge in their hobbies. They'll spend time with their friends and families. They'll travel. And if you keep pushing people hard enough, they say the same thing, which is they want to do something that makes the world a bit better. I think we all have an innate desire to want to make the world better. We're born into economic constraints that really prevent us from what I would argue living our true humanity. We primarily focus on living for ourselves, accumulating stuff for ourselves. I think that there's a world where we'll also live for other people. And to go back to your point, is that is not a world of where people don't suffer. There'll always be suffering, right? But if we had a helicopter now, we'd be arguing who leaves first, right? Time is scarce, mates are scarce. I would love to be able to run 100 meters faster than anybody else, but I'm never going to do that, right? There's things that I want that I will never be able to necessarily achieve. And so I'd much rather a world where people are fighting over that stuff rather than worrying about their children dying of disease because they can't access medicine.
Yes. Yeah, so that's absolutely where that world of abundance kind of pays dividend, and I call that the delta. Yeah, that delta I think is a real concern for me. Like exactly that point, which is where we're starting to get this loss of jobs before there's a direct uptick in new economies, new industries, new opportunities, and also that the savings made, those efficiencies actually are delivered in terms of cheaper goods and services. Indeed. And that's where we're going to need the governments and states to step up.
I think so too. Yeah, I think we need to be thinking about like things like universal basic income, things like 4-day working week. I don't really know what those mechanisms are. Yes. I haven't run the models, but I do think we need to think about taking the edge off that potential disruption.
Yeah. Well, the one thing that Callum and I also agreed on was this point of the fact that he actually said it was only 15% of people that go to work feeling any sense of purpose.
Right.
And so you've got the way I was guessing in a previous podcast, it was probably like 40% of people saying he was like 15%.
Yeah.
There's study being done on it, and I was like, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
And so actually, technology solves its own issues and problems, doesn't it? And it feels to me like people are talking about how this is going to affect people's purpose in life. I think it's actually going to free them up to find purpose.
Exactly, and I think that that is often one of the challenges is what does that world look like while people are trying to find their purpose, and that requires educating yourself, understanding what it means to be human, what really does make you happy. If you want a gold-plated Lamborghini, you probably also need a therapist, right? So, and what's really interesting, and people have done studies around this, that once you reach a certain amount of stuff. Yeah. And it's easy to say, right, and we hear this all the time on LinkedIn, but once you reach a certain amount of stuff, having more stuff is actually a burden. Like having an extra car, an extra garage. If you want more stuff, again, you've probably got some childhood traumas that you need to work through. But most of the people I know that have reached a certain amount of stuff, having more stuff doesn't make them happy. In fact, in some cases, it makes them unhappy. What makes them happy is having authentic, genuine experiences where they're affecting the lives of people or animals or the environment in a positive way.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and unleashing that, like I say, finding a way to unlock that is going to be really important. Yep. It does feel, though, like we are the generation, the journeymen that are leading everyone else to this world of abundance. Everyone else is going to get the material benefit of it, which I guess is, will this go down as that chapter in history of the most significant kind of period of transformation? Because it feels like we're like more than ever in the merge.
Yeah. Well, so one of the reasons why I do these podcasts and I do a lot of public speaking about AI is because I feel like if I can influence, 100,000 key decision makers, then by making a little bit better decisions, then we will hopefully steer ourselves towards a more positive outcome of this future. Yes. I am worried that we might not achieve those positive outcomes. Hence the reason why we're looking at building intelligent, maybe conscious machines to help navigate that future. So it's
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and it's one of the reasons that I very heavily lean in to waving the flag. And I've had some moments. I talk about this quite a lot, but 7 or 8 months ago, we have been building, and it's interesting to come back to your point. I was going to mention it earlier, but around this definition of intelligence that you gave, right? And so we've created, we call it a learning execution loop, okay, which actually mimics exactly that model. And so when you were talking about how do we define intelligence and consciousness, we've built that.
Yeah, adaptive.
And it has the abundance of these LLMs to provide it with a general decision-making learning loop.
Yeah.
And we have this example when we first bench test it. And we just run the agent, and we give it a very simple command, just a prompt, just to say, would you let Satish know we want to? I want to have a chat with him at 11 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
Anyway, hit the key, look at the screen, watch every action through the server, through the monitor.
Yeah.
And it goes off. It checks its resources. It decides who the right Satish is. Then it goes off and chooses the right channel.
Amazing.
WhatsApp or email.
Yeah.
Most communication on WhatsApp. Sends them a message.
Yeah.
Great. Then, done. Task complete.
Yeah.
Then goes off into its memory.
Yeah.
Goes off to context, creates a file, and writes communication preferences, Satish.
Right.
WhatsApp.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay,
exits.
wow.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we're completely unexpected, because it's just the architecture of decision-making loop, right?
Yeah.
And so, very small example.
Yeah.
But at that moment in time, you have this wow moment.
Yeah.
We're leaning into the right stuff, but also the guys.
Yeah. This emerging behavior that we don't necessarily or can't plan for.
Yes. Yeah. And so that's a tiny example, a modest example. Okay. But you come back to that point, which is that, it's this achieving a goal, and making a plan, learning from it, understanding the resources it has, and coming back from it. And so there is this. You're absolutely right. I've had that moment where I have a social care business, which is growing and thriving for exactly that social purpose that you spoke about. Very, very passionate about helping young children, really complex needs, education and therapy and a home and all of the love that they need in their lives. And our AI business is absolutely about riding the wave of technology. Yeah. It's about being part of it. And I had to address that question, which is, do I continue to, having seen that level of autonomy and thinking that's the start of what we're building, is this a journey that I really believe is the right thing for humanity?
Yeah.
And where you arrive at from a moral perspective is this is happening anyway.
Happen. Yeah.
It's most important that I stay on the journey because I'm prepared to wave the flag about it.
Yep. Yeah.
What you don't need is people which are not doing this and waving the flag. So it is. You're absolutely right. It is, and I say it's a bit of a dichotomy. You go, well, this guy's fucking building it.
Yeah.
Why is he warning us about it?
Yeah.
I think actually it's really important that the people which are in that space. Now, I understand that. And I don't know how I know this, but I do. But which is that you pitched Elon an idea around, was it Conscium or
yeah,
PRISM?
it was around how we might be able to get AIs aligned, and he said, and he hadn't thought about what the mechanism that I'd explained to him.
Yep.
So that was a gift to him, and but he was interested in the concept of having AIs become curious, and I'm also interested in what it means for AIs to be curious. In some respects, humans, animals, biology has evolved the curiosity to be able to become more adaptive, right? We sample the world, we test the world, and that allows us to become more adaptive, more intelligent. So for me, the concept of curiosity is really important. I think at the time when I was speaking to Elon, he was going through some challenges. So in terms of alignment, which is what I spoken to him about, was rather than building these large language models and then trying to play whack-a-mole to create the right guardrails, which I don't think is going to be ultimately massively sustainable or successful. Can you embed in this sort of the neurons of an AI a value system? And I did my master's on this related problem 23 years ago, where you could build very little simple agents, and I can create an environment where those agents have to either fight, lie, cheat, and kill each other to survive. So by doing these behaviors, they get the resources that they need to survive. Or I can create an environment, a game, where you have to be altruistic or sacrificial or cooperative to survive. By working together, you unlock resources to allow your genes to get passed on to the next generation. Right. And through the evolutionary process and with the right environment, you can evolve or embed values like altruism and sacrifice. And so in a world which doesn't have guardrails, you would want those AIs to behave in a way that's aligned with the value system. Now, the question is, whose value system? And so one of the things that Conscium is doing is we're launching an app called moral.me. And the idea is that you crowdsource moral dilemmas, any moral dilemmas. You can put whatever moral dilemmas you want in there. People then answer those moral dilemmas, and based on how you answer them, you create a moral profile. And the moral profile is using a concept called moral foundation theory, which is it's essentially 6 dimensions of morality. So you can compare your moral profile against your friends or Gandhi or whatever. But what for me, what's interesting is collecting the questions that identify variance in populations. So there might be a population here that all answer the questions in the same way, but there's one question that seems to split them. Those for me are the questions that are interesting that I can then use to then morally profile AIs. So what I want to eventually do in a world where people can build AIs using our platform and we're verifying them, and we can also morally profile them, but I also want to be able to say, this is what you need to do to influence, to change that AI, to change its moral profile. So that we essentially build AIs that are aligned somehow with our value system.
There's a random bug in OpenAI, which is that it turns a lot of English accents into Welsh text. Have you ever seen that?
No, I haven't seen it.
So it keeps happening on my Mac. And I started Googling it yesterday. I was like, fucking hell, why does this keep happening? It thinks I'm Welsh.
Yeah.
And so, but unbelievably, it's a bug that they've had.
Right.
Seems to be UK-based, mainly London-based randomly.
Right.
Which has been in the system for over 2 years.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so the relevance of that is that resolving, now normally that would be something you want to rapidly fix.
Yeah.
But when it's deep in the learning, in the heart of this neural network, influencing the way it thinks, interprets, processes, is obviously more difficult than what they maybe be perceived to do. And so the relevance of that obviously comes back to your point there, which is then trying to embed these values, morals, ethics in a soulful way sounds complex and difficult.
Yeah. Which is why we're taking this sort of evolutionary approach, which again will have its own emergent behaviors. But again, the nice thing about neuromorphic based agents is that we can look inside their brains and we can see, is this an authentic spike train or is it trying to deceive us?
Yes.
And that will have a different spike train than the others. So we might be able to also make them much more explainable than what currently large language models are.
When you think about this, there's such a significant, when we think about the roles of the future, what we're going to be doing.
Yeah.
Compliance, monitoring AI, is that not going to be one of the biggest roles?
That's why Conscium's starting a verification arm.
Yes.
So exactly.
Yeah. It just seems absolutely. So when we go back, it's interesting, isn't it? When you go back to the movies, I'm trying to remember which one it is, but we see these rows of people just looking at screens.
Yeah.
Always wonder what they were really doing. You know, I actually think this is probably what we're going to be doing when we roll it out.
Human beings trying to identify potentially bad behavior. I mean, in Conscium, we have both kind of human experts trying to set the tests, but also we've developed some IP that allows us to have AI set the tests as well. But the issue is that once an AI again is in production and it's adapting, just like your point earlier, you can adapt in ways that you can't predict, and then you get it's even more complicated to test for it.
There's two things I want to talk about. There's one which we'll come to in a minute, which is I want you to help us paint a picture of where we are in 10 years in your mind, right? So this is your best guess. But the second thing I wanted to understand was just a bit more about your current role.
Right.
So let's go a bit more into your journey. So you studied exactly where?
I studied at UCL. I studied AI at UCL. It was actually called Computer Science with Cognitive Science,
yes.
But all of the sort of modules were AI-related modules. There was actually 2 people in my year.
Really?
There's 2 of us that did my particular degree, and then I did a PhD modelling bumblebee brains, and I realised that the bottleneck in training brains was sort of compute. Like at the time, Jeff Hinton was using GPUs to try and figure out how to train brains, and obviously been incredibly successful, and that's why GPUs are very valuable right now.
Yeah.
I decided to not look at GPUs, but I looked at algorithms. So can we build more efficient algorithms to be able to train these brains? And then that took me into a whole world of what is called operations research optimization, which is a different field in computer science. So my PhD ended up changing from neural networks to optimization, decision making, and then I recognized that there was an opportunity to really take these technologies, these algorithms, to make a company. So I started a company. I never took any VC funding, but grew that company to about 120 deep AI experts over quite a long time. It was like over 12, 13 years. Spent a lot of time trying to educate the world about AI during that period and the importance of choosing the right algorithms. And then I sold that to WPP in 2021 for different reasons. There's some really interesting opportunities with WPP about applying it to marketing, and they obviously touch lots of brands that we can take AI to, and they give me a platform to think about these these big questions. And so I love my job in WPP, but again, WPP give me a huge amount of freedom, support to explore some of these bigger questions. And Conscium was born out of some of those conversations and actually invested in by WPP to explore these big questions around AI consciousness. So that's been my journey, and I get to invest in companies now and things like that. So I feel very fortunate to make sure that I'm using my assets and time and resources to steering us towards a positive direction.
Yeah, because hearing you think about the impact on such broader societal and humanity-based issues and problems, it's interesting that you're sat in a marketing business, right? But actually, if we think about marketing at that level, it's so much of it is cognitive, right?
Absolutely. So it's about understanding perception, and it's about understanding influence, and those are really, really, really hard problems. And ultimately, there are many hard problems in marketing, and from creativity to reaching the right people at the right time, not just with marketing materials, but with any material, whether it be a HR document or a sales material. It's understanding how you optimize getting the right stuff to the right people, and which is a really hard problem to solve. But yeah, I didn't actually know anything about marketing before joining WPP, but what I do know about is understanding what are the right algorithms to solve problems across supply chains, any supply chain, whether it be retail or finance, we're applying that methodology to WPP and beyond.
When you say solving those problems,
Yeah.
what do you mean there? Do you mean analysing the problems, or do you actually mean operational improvement?
Yeah, I have about 300 AI experts now. So my original company, Citalia, has grown to about 300 people.
Right.
And we are solving problems across creativity. So coming up with AI agents or brains that are able to enhance creativity, to dynamic segmentation. Arguably, AI is a segment that we're going to have to market to. So how do we figure out how to market to AIs? To content creation. So if you want to create an ad that's brand aligned and production grade, that's actually a very hard problem to solve. To understanding how to build synthetic audiences, to there's a whole array of different issues across that supply chain that can be solved algorithmically. So I'm responsible, my team is responsible to making sure that we are differentiated, that platform that we've built that solves marketing, by the way, that isn't just used in WPP, but it's used by now our clients, that is the best marketing platform in the world.
That team's AI capability is being resold out. So
it's actually sold out directly, but also it's being used to build technology that's embedded in that marketing platform.
Yes.
So if you're using this marketing platform to do marketing, it's using the knowledge, the data that we have in WPP, but also those models are the best models in the world because we've built them.
Yeah. That's a serious team.
It's amazing.
Look, they say that to build an absolutely stellar, world-class LLM to compete with the best, you only need 150 AI researchers, right?
Yeah. I mean, we're using off-the-shelf models, but taking those models again from intoxicated graduates to experts that you can rely on also in an agentic way is not trivial. A lot of those AI experts are developers as well, so they know how to build AI solutions and productionize it and scale it and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. How significant a change or impact what you're building is going to have on the marketing space over the course of the next 24, 36 months?
I think that we are going to give we have WP Open is our end-to-end marketing platform. We are delivering that to hopefully all of our biggest clients, the top 50 clients in the world, Coke and Nestle and others. And then we're also creating a WP Open Pro, which is a SaaS solution that can be accessible by a corner shop all the way through to a medium-sized business.
Right.
Again, that's utilizing the knowledge and data that we have in WPP. Yeah. So I think it's widely agreed that from an AI perspective, WPP are head and shoulders above our competitors, and so my job is to maintain that advantage.
Yeah, your title's Chief AI Officer.
Yeah, I got the title before AI happened, actually. So I got the title in 2021, and then AI happened at the end of 2022. So there's been obviously a load of now Chief AI Officers, but in some corner of the internet, I'm regarded as one of the top 10 Chief AI Officers in the world, and of course, my ego asks ChatGPT every now and again who are the most notable Chief AI Officers, and I often appear in the top 3 of those. So I think my job though is to make sure that there's a concept called GEO, Generative Engine Optimization, which is like SEO. Yep. So the question is, what data do you need to put on the internet so that when these models are trained, they associate concepts? So I obviously want to make sure that my name is associated with notable Chief AI Officers, and I'm not doing it consciously, but I seem to be putting the right data out there for LLMs to think that I am in the top 3, and I'd like to think that I am, but
good on you, the man from Walkham, killing it in the AI world.
Indeed.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's great. I love it. It's brilliant. Yeah. And do you know what the message there is? That you just, you just must not let or think that your environment in any capacity can limit your potential.
Yeah, I have a weird brain, I think, because so a lot of people, and I didn't realize this until my 30s, they have an internal monologue. I don't know if you've got like an internal monologue, like something chattering away.
Very limited.
That's actually, so it's quite rare. So about 1 in 20 people apparently don't have an internal monologue. Most people, I don't know if anybody in the room has, but most people have one or multiple voices that are sort of constantly chattering away, challenging them, saying, why did I say that? Should I say this? It must be exhausting. So my head is empty. So I was, there's nothing going on in my head. And I didn't realize until my 30s did most of the population have this kind of like this constant chattering. And so I don't have anything that's telling me that I should or shouldn't do things, and actually it gets me into a lot of trouble because I don't have a filter. That's one problem. I don't know what I'm going to say until I've said it, which is an issue. But I've always had the sort of feeling that anything that anybody else can do, I can do. That's the sort of my feeling. Is that as long as I put my mind to it, I can do anything that anybody can do.
I remember sitting down with an FD, and I was actually closing a business, sadly. And it was at one point I was 45 years old, had a real successful track record in all my businesses. 2020, had a problem, had to shut a number of businesses in a group, and the benefit of that was that I had this kind of free operational time. There was an FD that came in for an interim period to support me in that process. I was talking about getting into social care after that. And he was just baffled by that. And he was like, what? Nothing about social care. He didn't know me very well, but he got to know me during this process. And I was like, but I think that'll be my strength. And he goes, what? No, you want to do what you've done. And then my accountant said, oh, you've just had this failure. I said, you need to go back and double down in this area. And so you get all these external influences. And interestingly, I think that what we've done in the social care space, we've got a super fast growing business, scaling. You're not constrained by looking at solving the problems in traditional ways.
Indeed.
And if you look at that, it's what I was writing about this the other day actually, which is that one of the things I love about the world and business is that it's the people with least resources which often solve the problems in the best ways. It's back against the wall stuff.
Yeah, exactly. The constraints, force you to innovate, and arguably. No, I've missed the boat in terms of making an impact with large language models. But again, people are building data centers; they're throwing lots and lots of energy at it, which then forces you to think about, well, are there any other ways of doing this much more efficiently? And being a UK startup as well, we don't have access to the growth capital that you have in other parts of the world. So it does force you to be more innovative, which on the one hand is good, and on the other hand it can be a challenge sometimes. I think, sometimes not knowing how hard it's going to be or that it's impossible forces you to solve that problem. In fact, one of our first clients, one of Satalia's first clients was Tesco. So Tesco deliver to probably I think 200,000 points on a map every single day, and they were using, this was 13, 14 years ago, they were using an off-the-shelf solution that wasn't going to scale in the way that Tesco was going to scale their last mile delivery business. There was nothing actually on the market that was going to allow them to solve that problem. They understood it was an algorithmic problem, and they approached us because we knew about algorithms, and because we didn't know that one aspect of solving this problem was impossible, we solved it. So by not having those constraints, we solved this problem. And actually now you wouldn't think of WPP or Satalia as being leaders in last mile, but we have. And I'll challenge anybody to come and compare their solution against ours. We have the best last mile delivery solution in the world.
Wow.
And so we're starting to now win some really, really big accounts. But that was because we didn't know that something was impossible, so we solved it. And that's how we typically approach problems. We just make no assumptions about what's impossible.
Yeah, it's interesting. When we went on our journey with SuperReach back in January 2024, I said, look, technology needs to be as flexible, dynamic as intelligence. And they said, what's that mean? I said, well, it all needs to come from voice and chat. And my team kind of looked at me and went, well, how does that work? I said, no idea. And they started to tell me what the problems were. And I said, well, that's the first problem. When you need a new feature, you need to write a new API. That's the first problem we need to solve. That needs to become intelligent. And so you're just in solving it. And I'm not a technologist. I'm not a developer, not a technical person. But actually, it's the being prepared to ask the question and to then focus on the problem, the right problem. And that's led us to where we are today. And so it's interesting that you've been on a similar journey, or really your whole journey is about that, which is solving these unique problems. That last mile part, is that part of the offering that your existing business has? So it is stepping outside of marketing then into like you were saying, supply chain and
absolutely. One of the reasons why we're required by WP is because we have these capabilities that solve supply chains. And so if you've got a website that you want to, let's say you've got a fleet of vehicles and you've got a website that you want to offer slots to customers, we have the software that optimizes all of that fleet. We've got software that predicts footfall in stores, that optimizes employees. One of our most successful projects is with PwC, where we built an AI that can optimize their 5,000 auditors, across a complex demand. So one of the reasons why we're required by WPP was because we've got these logistics capabilities. The other one is we have a capability around workforce optimization of WP of over 100,000 people. We have an understanding about what algorithms are good at solving what supply chains, particularly marketing. We can take AI to any client, and so that unlocked a whole new opportunities for us. And then me having the chief AI officer hat and standing on the shoulders, the platform that is WPP, gives me the ability to hopefully influence policy and organizations in a positive way.
Yeah, I was struggling to understand why you're in that role when you've got this broader perspective. But actually now you articulate the platform that provides you with and the impact you can have. Makes total sense.
Yeah, and I have to say, I love working with my WPP colleagues. You're in an industry that's being completely disrupted by AI. It's a really, really hard problem. Now, there's often a phrase that people use, which is only 50% of marketing works, but nobody knows which 50%. And so, it's a wicked problem to solve. And it also touches upon behavioral psychology and sociology and capitalism and all this kind of stuff. So really, really big questions that you're forced to answer. And again, marketing, our clients come to us to try to understand the future, where they should be marketing their goods, how they should be reaching new audiences. So in some respects, our job is to also try and figure out how to predict and leverage the future.
Yeah. How influential and important is this philosophy you're reading about? So you're reading about philosophy and other kind of much more, it's not about technology and necessarily.
No.
It's more about kind of these underlying key drivers of our society.
I don't know. I think I've always been curious about what it means to be a human, what our place is in the universe. And I just wrote an article recently that I put on LinkedIn about my top 16 tips for entrepreneurs, and one of those tips were you need to own your dysfunctions. And a lot of the organizations that I see, the dysfunctions that they have in their organizations are amplifications of the founder or the founding team or the leadership. So your dysfunctions are your company's dysfunctions. And if you want to solve those dysfunctions, you need to solve them in you. And you're not going to solve them by reading business books. You're going to solve them by reading about attachment disorders and, how human relationships work and, what really motivates you as a human being.
Yes.
And so I would argue, there's 10 books that you should read around philosophy and psychology and sociology and biology, understanding about evolutionary theory, for example, that are more than 1,000 business books.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I say that a business is a direct reflection of its leadership.
Exactly
the point you raise, and people don't take that seriously enough, do they? Actually, they really are role modeling their business, and actually those weaknesses and those vulnerabilities they need to address.
Indeed.
So understanding that, So by understanding and reading about those areas, do you feel like that's giving you a better, a more rounded approach to how you're operating in business?
Well, I don't really know what goes into my brain. I hope so. I hope by absorbing these concepts, a little bit like an AI, really, by making those sort of unconscious connections that you end up making more more positive decisions.
Yes.
But I am also very purpose driven. So Satalia's purpose actually was and it still is actually to create a world of abundance. So it's to remove the friction from the creation and dissemination of goods. We use algorithms to make things more efficient, last mile warehousing, whatever, and the goal is to bring the cost of those goods down so they become abundant, so that it then frees people to go and use their time to make a better world. So I am very and Conscium's North Star is to could we build machine consciousness, and so that for me is a guiding North Star to be making decisions.
Yeah. Which leans nicely into my final kind of question, which is all about the future.
Yeah.
So paint it for us in your mind. Where are we heading 10 years from now, what does the world look like?
Well, I often say that anybody that tries to predict the future beyond 5 years doesn't know what they're talking about. So I'm going to, I guess I could paint a picture of what I want the world to look like. And again, the future hasn't been created yet, right? So it's within all of our gifts to make better decisions that steer us towards positive outcomes of these singularities. So we can create, as I said, a world where all content is authenticated and it's not a post-truth world. We can create a world where AI understands you and can influence you, but in a way that is positive rather than exploiting your unconscious biases. So we can make better decisions. There's a concept that actually Callum introduced me to called a protopia. So I think we'd all agree on what a dystopia is, but we might not agree on what a utopia is. What a protopia is a system that is incrementally getting better. And so what I want to do is I want to create a world where we are freeing people up from jobs, the stuff that they don't want to be doing. We're giving them the ability to have access to abundance, education, etc., and that they are then figuring out how to use their time to then not just make themselves happy, but also make other people happy. So the more people we free from these economic constraints, the more freedom we give them to access these tools. I hope that they will use this power to create a better world for other people. And so that for me is a virtuous cycle. Yes. And that's I want in 10 years to create a protopia.
A protopia. Can you be more graphic in terms of how you think the world might look? And I know you're guessing here, right?
Yeah.
But and I agree with you that even 5 years right now, I think 3 years is my kind of, I think I can see where it gets to 3 years. But 10 years, what types of change do you think we could expect to see?
I'd like to see way more people that are economically free, so that are not living on $1 a day, but that have access to free education. Arguably, if everybody had a mobile phone and access to the internet, then education becomes free. Because everything you need to learn, is on the internet. And now everybody has access to these models that can build apps, etc. I guess one of the main challenges is food and healthcare. But again, you can imagine a world where we have drones or transportation. We have mechanisms to build to grow food, robots that can then distribute that food and fix each other. You can imagine a world where actually people can access the food that they need. So 10 years might be a little bit too aggressive. Energy should be free in 10 years' time. Probably there is a massive wealth disparity. Often entrepreneurs get criticized because they start a company, it's successful, they sell it, they make loads of money, then they go and build more companies that make even more money. And what it looks like to the outside world is they're just wanting to accumulate more money. But you probably know this, that having a commercial vehicle that's being held to account by the market, that's creating value, genuine value that people are purchasing, that they can be very efficient mechanisms to create value. And yes, they might become very, very successful, but you're not motivated to create them to make more money. You're motivated to do it because this is the most effective vehicle to have an influence on society. So I do think there will probably be a group of people that have a massive amount of wealth, but I think if we free more and more people up from economic constraints, then those people don't have any power over them, right? If that makes sense. If you don't have to, if somebody can't control your access to education and food and all these things, then they have no power over you. So I don't know. Maybe 10 years again. I struggle with. I like to ultimately create a Star Trek economy, right? Like I don't know if you watch Star Trek, but there's a world where we're out there exploring space and stuff's accessible. So, and what matters is not the accumulation of stuff, but it's what matters is who you are as a human being and your impact on humanity.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, you referenced that bit about having an impact. You're absolutely right. So that we're in social care. Why is that? Because we want to have an impact. Why do we think we can have an impact? Because we build brilliant leadership teams that normally end up becoming the best player in their market. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, well, actually, why wouldn't we do that in a market where there's a really strong social impact?
Indeed.
And so we're really passionate about that. And it's interesting, we're doing all sorts of things, but the most memorable things I take away from our business are the testimonials we get from parents.
Right.
That's the thing that steps in my
must
mind.
Be very proud.
Yeah. And well, that's the one positive. What then steps in my mind is just problems.
Yeah.
I'm obsessed with the problems, right? So I get the kind of the reward system is, pretty light touch.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of it, but it's obsessing over the problems. And when you roll that forward, you're right, there are going to be significant winners. I think it was Callum that was talking about the fact that you've got Moore's law, which is the expediting growth of technology.
Yeah.
But there's a point at which and I think right now AI is accelerated quicker than Moore's law.
Yeah.
As a new law of some sort.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're aware of it. But his point was that actually, when that trajectory becomes so steep, it almost becomes impossible for people to catch up with those technology leaders. The acceleration is so quick, unless there is a disruptive technology. And so you might look at NVIDIA today, absolutely flying. Is that really going to be caught up? I don't think so in its current market. No. Does it get gazumped by someone who delivers quantum?
Yeah.
Quite possibly. And so there are kind of these generational leaders that will eventually be usurped by a different type of a different medium. But you're right. I think that as a society, we shouldn't be measuring the success of them. We should be exclusively focused on raising the bar of the standard of living for everyone.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's where this kind of journeyman is going to be, in my opinion, I think we've got a bumpy road getting to a place where that abundance lies. Yeah. But I can't think of, 10 years from now, what do I think? I think, 3-day working weeks, that quite possible. Yeah. I think relocalization of manufacturing. Yep. So robots, humanoids will localize manufacturing. Yep. Supply chain costs are reduced on cost of goods. Autonomous vehicles. Yep. We're on Mars.
Yep. Yep.
Space travel and technology becomes much more accessible, reusable.
Yep. What about energy?
Yeah. So I think that'll be solved. Yep. Will fusion be solved within 10 years?
In the book Genesis, they argue that it will be sort of 95% chance in the next 5 years.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm not close to that domain, so I don't know.
No, but I do agree with you. That is the golden key, isn't it? That I'm excited about. Quantum, I'm terrified by.
Right. Because of cryptography, because I think there are mechanisms you can create quantum cryptography so that it will be even harder for a quantum machine to crack. For me, quantum is just a compute. It's just a mechanism for accelerated compute.
My concern with quantum is that the technology itself. So the great thing about AI, is that its barrier to entry has been so significantly lowered. Yeah. And so that's great for distribution of opportunity. It's also, in my opinion, creates an existential threat with malign actors with it, right? So you've got a yin and yang there. The quantum stuff, the barrier to entry just seems much higher. Yeah. Okay, so you're back into the nuclear realm here in terms of trying to stabilize fucking qubits, right? Yeah. And so what worries me about that is just the competitive advantage that the leaders of that get and just how quickly. So even if you think about, the way I think about that is, but even before you put it into commercial use for a consumer, what's the advantage to Google or IBM or Chinese government or whoever it is once they've got that stabilized for their own use? Yeah. And so that's the concern there. Did you have a view on that?
Well, it depends on how much competition there is, but one nice thing about this capitalistic model is that as you've got a technology that's continuing to sort of grow rather than plateau, the best way of competing against them is actually by making your technology free or open source. So the way that I can get access to that market is by actually making that and something that's more abundant. And that hopefully at some point, once I've got enough customers, I'll figure out how to make the commercial model work in the future. So if you had enough competition around quantum, you would hope that some people out there would be making that quantum, again, open or almost free to compete against the other people.
Yeah, that's the second to market model, isn't it? Scorched earth.
Exactly.
So,
exactly.
I'm behind. So
which again, ironically, then compounds this idea of abundance. So, these technologies are becoming more free.
But it didn't work for Zuck, did it? he fucked it right up.
Well.
He went with that. He actually, to be brutally honest with you, I hadn't heard the term scorched earth until he spoke about it, and that's why he was deploying his open source model. Right. but it's backfired on them. It just hasn't worked well for them, has it?
Llama?
Yes,
well,
the first version of it.
Yeah, I don't know what the latest versions are, but China are open sourcing their models, and but I think we'll still continue seeing people bring the cost down or undercutting the market, and making them free.
The relevance of it was being second to market.
Yeah.
Not necessarily does it always work and accelerate you, because he was hoping that the way to catch up is to go and open source like that.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, how do you feel about open sourcing with the LLM market? What's your view on it?
It's tricky, isn't it? Because you're first of all, it's great because more and more people have access to it, which is brilliant. But at the same time, more and more people have access to it, including bad actors. So the challenge then is, how do you make sure that you're mitigating any risks associated with bad actors using these technologies to do bad things?
When you think about bad actors with AI and LLMs, what are the things that immediately you worry about?
Social engineering. So, obviously we can use AI to create traditional attacks on infrastructure, but you can get now AIs that sound like your partner or your children, and so social engineering, I think, is going to be an interesting challenge to solve for. And again, I'm in the business of understanding persuasion and influencing people, and so that's a very powerful position to be in. So obviously we're doing it safely and responsibly, but we need to also prevent bad actors from using these technologies to influence people that allow them to get more access to wealth and power. That said, like, again, if you extrapolate out to a world of abundance, I would argue that you do bad things either because you're mentally unstable or you're trying to feed your family, and hopefully we'll catch people early on who are mentally unstable and support them in the way that there are mechanisms out there to help people with those things. But in a world where you have access to food and healthcare and energy and all that kind of stuff, then why would you commit crime if you already can feed your family? So I don't know. I'd like to think that a world of abundance would have a massive reduction in crime. The issue is going to be obviously countries fighting each other over resources, and that for me is my kind of one of my concerns.
Yeah, I've been spending some time with people in the space agencies and in working for different businesses in that, because that again seems like such a significant, well, twofold actually. One is that it's a technology which is just evolving so rapidly. It is a foundational kind of element to our future. But second of all is the fact that it's the vulnerability we have. Yeah. Through all of our infrastructure going through satellites and stuff. And so the more I understand that, the more I really recognize how dependent we are on this near orbit infrastructure that we've thrown out there. But you then talk about, I then read only this week that Russia is attacking our US space infrastructure on a daily basis. Yeah. You're like, what is going on? So this kind of application of AI, I think about so all the things you've mentioned. The other issue I'm concerned about is the relationship that humans start to build with these models, companions, advisors, and actually that feeds into something else which I was going to talk about, which is that I sat down with a guy called Dr. Tom Chatfield. Right. Don't know if you know him. He talks about the relationship. About critical thinking and how AI is affecting the way that we think. Yeah. And he was talking about, well, we've always had different tools and humans have always evolved with them, and this is no different. But we did agree on the fact that we've always been the intelligence that's executing with those tools. Yeah. And my concern is that now, if you look at it, people are looking at AI and LLMs as a greater level of intelligence. They're looking for it for direction, which tips the whole thing on its head.
Yeah, I really struggle with this whole, we've always created new jobs, industrial revolutions kind of argument that it's just a tool. Yeah, we have created new jobs that humans can do, but in a world where we create jobs that AIs can do everything that humans can do, then that changes everything. And actually, I think one of the biggest use cases for AIs right now is therapy. It's actually, I think I've seen this kind of infographic. I don't know how true it is, but it's therapy. It's organizing your life in the 30s, finding purpose. And I think that's wonderful, by the way. I think obviously we need to make sure that it's giving good advice. Even a very close family member, yesterday I was talking to a very close family member who said, he's been struggling with some of his mental health recently, and he was advised to ask, ChatGPT these 10 questions about understanding himself. He spent 3 hours, interacting with ChatGPT and learning a lot from that. And so I think they actually can have a huge amount of benefit to people and actually help them critical think. Some people are arguing that they were using them to just to do work and it's making us lazy. But arguably we can use them as a mechanism to challenge our own biases and preconceptions and bigotries.
Yeah, reflection. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I wrote something about intelligent connection replacing human connection, which went down like a lead balloon.
Yeah,
and but I said, look, guys, it's happening. Whatever you say, that doesn't mean that human connection won't be sustained in some and become more important in many ways. But intelligent connection, we are leaning into these models. And a guy replied and said, "I'll take advice over my wife every day of the week over a model." And I went, "Well, come and see me." And so we came, met for the first time, had a podcast. Yeah. And I said, "Get your wife on the phone." And I've got a scenario here.
Yeah.
Right. Here's a scenario, completely unplanned. Yeah. Here's a scenario. Ask your wife how she'd deal with it. Yeah. Right. And she was like, and long story, convoluted story, some friends having a breakdown in their marriage. Yeah. Should we tell the husband or not? Yeah. Her advice: tell the husband. You've got to tell him. Bosh. Yeah. Ask ChatGPT. ChatGPT come up with like a 15-point plan around how protecting your time and your emotions, disconnecting you. Yeah. Set a framework and some boundaries out. And actually had a completely different approach, and its comprehensiveness, and it's just like, wow, I'm done. It's incomparable.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so, but that's where the malign and bad actors come in. I can't think that we've had the issues with TikTok, but if you've got a companion app, you've got 200 million Americans, which are all leaning on, chatting away, and getting advice on their life, and etc. The value of that to a business, but also to a malign actor, very subliminally to influence.
Absolutely, yeah. It's an incredibly powerful position to be in.
Yes.
One of the things actually that Conscium is exploring is the ability to create a personal agent that's just yours, that isn't trained on ChatGPT or anything like that. It's just trained on your data. It's like it has a world model. It's like, imagine being banged on the head and not having any memory, but you still know how to speak and you still know how to operate in the world, but you don't have any memory, so you don't have any bias in some respects. And so imagine that kind of skeleton then being trained on your data that you can then use to give you advice, rather than relying on something that's been trained on data that you don't know. So that's one of the ideas we're exploring.
Yeah. I don't think there's ever been a greater period of life or time to be living in.
Yeah. No, when I was I was born in 1980, and when I was in my 12, 13, I was thinking, it's a really, really boring time to be alive, isn't it? Like, there's not much going on, and it seemed like that people in the Renaissance were having a lot of fun, and then the internet came along, and then everything changed. So I think this is perhaps the most important and exciting time to be alive, and I think it's important that everybody leans into it.
Yes, and look, I commend you for what you've achieved. It's incredible. And
I feel like I've only just started.
Yes, I know, and that's it. This chapter has really opened up for you, hasn't it? It really has opened up for what you've been working on for such a long time. But more importantly than that is that it needs people which have got the right platform to raise to wave the flag and raise the alarm. And my biggest concern is that governments, world bodies don't act before there's a problem. We don't want the Hiroshima example to act. And so I'm hoping that they'll start to see some small problems and act before we have a major one.
Indeed. Yeah. No, every technology that we have created that can have a material impact on people's lives, whether it be in automotive or aerospace or pharmaceuticals, they've been regulated, but they've been regulated post them going wrong, right? Incrementally, as things go wrong, we regulate them. And I think arguably we can't wait for that to happen with AI. That said, I do think that, people will deploy AIs. And then, you talk about humanoids as well. They will deploy robots. It will go wrong. There will be more regulation. But there is a worry that, somebody in their bedroom now has access to the most intelligent machine that we've ever built, and could point that to something that could be catastrophic.
It's going to be pointed, and it's going to have big impacts over the. I predict at least within the next 36 months, we'll start to see some real malign actors, sadly.
So we need more people, I think, with a purpose that really are trying to solve some of these and mitigate some of these issues.
Yes, absolutely. Well, look, great. Thank you for taking the time out.
It's
a real
pleasure
pleasure to meet you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you.
Cheers, mate.